Record to reflect the presence of Mr. Chrisman, counsel, and the jurors. Good morning. Mr. Narrens, you may proceed with your closing argument.
Thank you, John. Good morning. When I left you yesterday afternoon, we had listened to the 911 tape and understood why the officers went to the trailer park. There's been a lot of discussion as to who came first and what difference it made. I'm suggesting that when you parse all that evidence, you really find out that it doesn't really make a lot of difference as to who arrived first. But there's been some indication that someone said something that he arrived before the other one. And I put a short clip up yesterday to indicate to you that Sergio Virgilio said that they arrived at the same time, but I'd like to show you that testimony again and then what followed it from page 425. So, did you two get to the mobile home park at the same time, sometime later, or how did that work? Answer, we arrived about the same time. And so were you able to find this eventually? Yes. And this trailer, number 50, who got there first, you or Chrisman? Answer, I did. Question, and so was Chrisman there shortly thereafter, or was he there minutes later? How did that work? Answer, shortly thereafter. So, and then what happened? I exited my patrol Tahoe and walked to trailer 50. Question, when you walked to trailer 50, was anybody with you? Answer, yes. Question, who was that? Answer, Chrisman. So that was the evidence in this case as to how these two officers arrived at trailer 50, talked to Elvira Fernandez, went back, knocked on the door, no answer, went back, talked to her again, where she told them she wanted her son out of there. Please, the door's unlocked, please go in. And then they went back to trailer 51 the second time. Now, Officer Virgilio told you that sometime during that short trip back, his phone vibrated and he got a personal telephone call. He had I believe the testimony was, a Samsung Galaxy smartphone. And so, at a minimum, the number came up, and at a maximum, possibly even a name, but there's no testimony that a name came up. But we do know that he said a number came up, and he knew that he thought it might be his sergeant's number. Of course, we know it wasn't, because he told us it was a call from a Honda dealer, or a Honda repair shop, sorry. And that, when he took that call, he talked for, depending on the testimony, a few seconds or a minute, or up to a minute. We know from the telephone company that it could not have been more than a minute, and it could have been less. So, but we do know from his telephone records that there were 27 contacts with his sergeant, Sergeant Matson. I think you heard Rich Chrisman tell us that when they had the initial briefing, these folks all came on about, they all did this rebid is what they called it, and they came on duty about September 3rd to the 400 precinct, the South Mountain precinct. That's when this squad started down there with Sergeant Matson in command, so to speak. And you heard Rich Chrisman tell you that Sergeant Matson gave them all his personal cell phone number, because you heard the testimony. It was not uncommon for Sergeant Matson to contact his squad member or members with his personal cell phone. And we found from Mr. Virgilio and this exhibit 375 in evidence you'll have is Sergeant Matson's cell phone number. So you'll be able to verify what I'm telling you today by looking at Exhibit 375 and then comparing it with Exhibit 370.001. and that is the redacted portion of Sergio Virgilio's telephone records. The ones that are out, obviously, you need not be concerned with. They don't have anything to do with anything. But the ones that are on this record show that there were 27 times that there was contact between Sergio Virgilio and Sergeant Mattson. And the one that was up there for just a minute ago showed that there was, as late as the morning of October 5th, a text either to or from Sergeant Mattson. So in the period between September 3rd and October 5th at noon, now there are a few calls after noon, I'm not concerned about those. From September 5th, September 3rd till October 5th at noon, there were 27 times that the cell phone by Sergio Virgilio was used to communicate with his sergeant. Either he called, Sergeant Mattson called, or he texted. 27 times in a month. And yet he would have you believe, and the state would have you believe, that he thought the number that came up, and you look at it, and you compare it to Exhibit 375, Sergeant Mattson's number, and you see if it bears any similarity to his sergeant. It doesn't. He knew it was not his sergeant that was calling him, I suggest. It's a reasonable inference from this evidence. He knew he was getting a personal cell phone call, and he decided to take it and talk to him. He has to say that because the telephone records show that he talked on it, that it wasn't an incomplete call. And so he tells you, God, just for a couple of seconds. Not a problem. Now, we know from the record, this 370.001, that he took this call at 12:32. This is important because we know that within a second or so after he got the call, or maybe 5 seconds, let's say, that Rich Chrisman knocked on the door. So we know that's when it started. Now, we know that they were at the trailer for a period of time. Sergio Virgilio would like you to believe that it was for a minute. He said it was a minute, 60 seconds. That's all it took. The whole time, from the start till the finish, till I put out a 998, it was 60 seconds. But we know that's not true. Because we know from Exhibit 381 that's in evidence that the 998 call he put out, officer-involved shooting, went out at 12:37. So we have electronic records to know how long he was at the trailer. And we have electronic records and data to show how long he left his partner in that trailer. You know, it's hard to approximate time, although officers are supposedly better at it than we are because they have reports to make. And a minute may seem, or 2 minutes may seem like a minute. But I suggest to you 5 minutes does not seem like a minute. 5 minutes is a very long time. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about this trailer that we laid out here. In a courtroom this big, it kind of looks big. But as Mr. Martinez suggested to you yesterday, there's a wall straight up to the ceiling. This is a door, there's a wall here, and then there's an opening that's filled pretty much with bags and boxes, and then there's a wall all the way down here, and then there's a kitchen counter pass-through that's here. And the back wall is the front of this jury wall right here, and it goes over here, and if this weren't here, we could walk in here and go down the hall. And this space here that I'm standing is the couch that was here. There were other things here. We'll look at the pictures in a minute. There's a coffee table that's more down this end. This space right here is left open. There's things all over in this corner. There's a chair over here. There's stuff over there. This is a very small place to be left in alone. The 29-year-old man who was jacked up on methamphetamine and his pit bull. This is a very, very tiny space. Mr. Martinez took three or 3.5 hours to go over everything that happened in this 5 minutes. But when you think about what happened at 12:30 on October 5th, close your eyes and put yourself in this very small place and then think about it, open them and think about being in there, 29-year-old young man and a pit bull who appears to be very angry, without any help. Hindsight is 20/20. The luxury of hindsight is 20/20. Rich Chrisman didn't have that luxury. Now, we know that Rich opened the door, looked, saw a dog coming, with a dog, and then Danny came, pulled the door shut, not shut, closed to shut, and then there was some back and forth. Mr. Martinez would have you believe that the testimony is that he opened the door and strode right in, but that's not the testimony in the evidence. Testimony is that Mr. Rodriguez tried to shut the door on him, and it was at that point that he made the decision that he needed to go in, that he was not going to let the suspect be shut in there and barricade himself in there with the officers outside. That's not his job. That's not what he's paid to do. And so he opened the door and went in. My colleague yesterday, it seems to me, led you to believe that the evidence is that there was no yelling, there was no screaming, there was no hollering in this trailer during these 5 minutes. And he suggests that to you because he says Catherine Black didn't hear anything. And I agree, that's what Catherine Black said. That's true. But yet, on one hand, he tells you yesterday, believe Miss Black, there wasn't any yelling and anything going on like that. No barking, nothing, because she didn't hear it. But believe what Sergio Virgilio says as to what happened in there. Well, how can he have it both ways? How can he have one of his witnesses say A and the other one totally contradict him? And let me show you who contradicts Miss Black. It's his own witness. In the transcript, page 42, Mr. Martinez is discussing the situation with Sergio Virgilio, and you can see Mr. Martinez discussing etc. Question. So what happened then after you are being told, you know, you don't have this warrant? Then whatever the expletive answer. Chrisman argues back and yells back at the son. Right, so that's the first time that Mr. Virgilio says there was yelling. And then shortly thereafter, on page 47, Ms. Martinez asks again, was there anything that he was saying as this was happening? Answer, there was still just yelling. Fuck you, that type of stuff. Just some trash talking. Again, the word yelling. The word that he suggests that Ms. Black didn't hear and therefore there wasn't any. And finally, during his redirect, Mr. Martinez asked again on page 128, question, what was he doing then? He was just yelling, and he was just loud. Did he want to come out of the trailer at that point? Answer, no. And from all we know as to what was happening at that time and the condition of Mr. Rodriguez, yelling seems like a reasonable conclusion as to what happened at that time. All right, I'd like to turn to another, what I would call glaring inconsistency in the state's evidence, and the reason that Sergio Virgilio's evidence is not to be trusted has to do with the tasing. You know, Mr. Martinez has said that Rich Chrisman was derelict in not bringing his second cartridge with him And moreover, that he didn't do the spark test that morning, and therefore he came unprepared. Well, you know the evidence is that a spark test does not tell you if the cartridge is any good, okay? We know that's a fact because you take the cartridge out to do the spark test. So had he done the spark test, wouldn't have made any difference, because we all know that his taser worked to the extent it fired. Mr. Martinez would have you believe that the cartridge didn't work. Well, you know, maybe that's a reasonable belief, but it doesn't make any difference because there's no check for the cartridge. So the spark test doesn't make any difference. So he didn't have another cartridge. Well, that seems not to be that important because tasers didn't seem to have any effect on Daniel Rodriguez. Nothing seemed to have any effect. He could have had 6 cartridges with him on his taser and kept using them, because we know that the first taser, even if it didn't hit him, and we know it didn't, from Rich Chrisman's taser, we know when that didn't work, Rich went up and drive stunned him, put the taser gun up to him and cycled it and tried it. We know that didn't work. And we know that when Mr. Vigillo tased him, it worked for a minute, but that was all. So I suggest this spark test rabbit trail is nothing more than just that, a rabbit trail. Okay. But let's go back and revisit Sergio Vigillo's testimony as to its authenticity versus what we know from the evidence concerning the taser and Rich's taser. From Sergio Vigillo's direct testimony, page 49. So, then what happens? I tell Chrisman to tase him, and you remember Rich Chrisman saying he heard that sound, that statement come from outside the door. Why do you do that? Well, as I was coming in, I noticed that Chrisman was closer to him, and I said, tase him. And did he do that? Answer, yes. And were you able to see whether or not he was able to actually have a hit, if you will, with the 2 prongs going, or were you too far to see what happened? I didn't see the actual prong strike Daniel. Question, was there a reaction from Daniel? Answer, yes. Daniel fell down, back. Question, and did he stay down? Answer, yes. And did he go down on the floor? Did he go down on the couch? Where did he go down? He went down pretty much exactly where I put that X. Now, my memory, and yours is the one that counts, and we'll show you some things in a minute, but is that Vigillo's X is right about here at this end of the couch. That's where he said Danny Rodriguez went down when Rich Chrisman tased him. Now, on redirect, just in case there was any question in anybody's mind as to where Mr. Vigillo thought Rich Chrisman tased Daniel, on page 131. Then what happens? Chrisman tases Daniel, and they were where? Daniel was back near the hallway area by the couch, and he gets tased, right? He goes down, right? Answer, right. Yes. I'm sorry. Thank you. Answer, yes. All right, let's take a look now before I draw what I believe are reasonable conclusions from all of this. Exhibit 100. This is a picture of the sofa in the room. And you can see from the far end, at the far end by the hallway, where Sergio Vigillo, where the arrow is, said that Rich Chrisman tased Mr. Rodriguez and where he fell back, you can see, number one, that's not disturbed. And number two, with that coffee table, there's not any room in it. I mean, Sergio Virgilio's testimony doesn't make any sense, just looking at the sofa. Later, I hope you'll remember that Rich Chrisman said when the taser worked, it was at this other end, and that's where Danny went, and that's where he went, and he thought he had a chance to put some cuffs on him. That looks disturbed, I suggest. So I'd ask you to keep that in mind as you consider Sergio Virgilio's testimony. And finally, I've just shown you the sworn testimony of Officer Virgilio, where he said that Rich Chrisman tased him and his taser worked. And he saw the effects of Rich Chrisman's taser probes. He said he didn't see the probes, but he saw the effects at two different times in his testimony on Danny Rodriguez. But exhibit, this is 78, is the far end of the couch and the board. Okay? And exhibit 103 is the close-up of the board. That's Rich Chrisman's taser point. I mean, Mr. Martinez told you that. The evidence told you that too, but I mean, Mr. Martinez argued that. He missed. Well, we know if he missed, that Danny Rodriguez was not hit by the taser and it didn't affect him. So how could Sergio Virgilio be telling the truth on two different occasions when he tells you he saw Rich Chrisman tase him? He said, "Tase him, Rich," and I saw him fall down there. How could he say that? Well, he can't say it because it's true, but he could say it if he was standing out here and couldn't see and needed to decide to make up a story because he wasn't aware when he was deciding on what to do the afternoon of October 5th. He wasn't aware that the physical evidence showed that Rich Chrisman's taser hadn't worked. So he made that up, and that's what he was stuck with later that night when he talked to Detective Porter at about 5 o'clock. So he didn't talk to anybody before that. So I suggest there's sworn testimony, physical evidence, that clearly proves to you that what Sergio Virgilio tried to get you to believe last month is not credible, it's not true. And it's not just a little minor picky detail. Now, let me turn to the end when Sergio Virgilio became, as he calls it, the calming force, and I'd like to discuss the evidence about that. He was asked by Mr. Martinez on page 136 concerning what happened to Danny. And when you started to talk calmly and something you discussed on cross with Daniel Hernandez, Mr. Hernandez, Rodriguez, what was his demeanor? He stopped, looked at me, and I was actually speaking with him. And he looked at me, and it looked like he was listening to what I was saying. And then he goes on, I believe, the next page. Yes, 137. Well, he had changed. Chrisman raised him up here. I brought him down. To start with, Rich Chrisman didn't raise him up. Methamphetamine raised him up, but that's more than that later. Rich Chrisman raised him up. I brought him down. And when you brought him down, where were his hands? What was he doing? He was just standing there. And when you started to talk And then you started to talk to him, right? Answer, yes. And at that point, who suggested the bike? I know you talked about it, but who suggested the bike and grabbing it and that sort of thing? Answer, I told Daniel, hey, I'll take you anywhere you need to go. Hey man, I'll take you anywhere. He said he wanted to go to his dad's, and then he said, no, I'll just take my bike. And then he went to get the bike. Answer, yes. All right. Is it believable that this individual all of a sudden, after 4 minutes, decided to calm down? Is it reasonable to believe after the officers went hands-on, after he was pepper sprayed, after he was tased, all during which he's high on meth, he said, hey, guys, you're all right. I'm out of here. To start with, Sergio Virgilio told you on his examination by counsel, by the state's counsel, excuse me, that Mr. Rodriguez was calm, that he wasn't a threat, that he seemed to be just fine. That's what he told you. That's what he wanted, and they want you to believe. But yet, when he was interviewed by Sergeant Agia and Sergeant Klein, that's not what he said. This is a long time ago, but we played this clip for you, and I'd like to play it again for you. It's, I believe, the clips that we'll play are from Exhibits 283, 293, 294, and 301 on these CDs, and you could listen to them. All right, could we have clip 3, please?
The way he was acting, the way that he took that spray, did you get like any impression like, hey, maybe this guy is under the influence of alcohol, drugs?
Yes.
Or maybe he's mentally unstable and he's...
All of the above. Something's not right with this guy. He's too inked up.
Right, so he's jacked. When you say he's jacked up, he's just full of energy. Was he fidgety? Was he moving back and forth?
He was just very quick, very excited.
Okay. And that was just...
Very confident.
That's what he told Sergeant Agia and Klein. I believe that was the evening of October 5th. Danny was mentally unstable, hinked up, jacked up, very quick, very excited, very confident. That's consistent with the evidence and the testimony from Norman Wade and Dr. DeMaio. That's consistent with the testimony of the experts and the evidence and the amount of methamphetamine that Mr. Rodriguez had in the system. What isn't consistent with the evidence is Sergio Virgilio's testimony to you about him, and all of a sudden calming down, walking over to the bike, somewhere like here, and saying, hey, I'm going to take this bike, I'm going to go over to my dad's. I want you to look at another exhibit and suggest to you that that doesn't make any sense for another reason. And this picture is a little graphic, Exhibit 94. I'd like to zoom in on a part of Exhibit 94. That's the probe from Sergio Virgilio's taser that was in him when he was supposedly calmed down and walking over to the bike. We saw the probe from Rich Chrisman's. Those things, they can stick in a board. And it was sticking in him then, and look at the wires from the taser that are wrapped around his hand. So he was just going to take his bike and these wires and this probe, and as Sergio Virgilio would have you believe, calmly go outside and drive over to his dad's. Now, I'm going to change the subject for a minute and come back to this in a second, but I want to use this photo for another purpose. You've heard Rich Chrisman tell you that after the shooting he put gloves on and that he went in to check Danny Rodriguez's vital signs. You heard his testimony that he checked his neck, and in my memory the testimony is, and yours is what counts, is that he put his thumb on his left wrist. And if you try that, you can feel your pulse. I can feel mine going faster than I'd like it to be. And that's what he said. Now, if you zoom in on this exhibit, 94, and you look at Danny's left wrist, right where a pulse would be checked for, I suggest you see the indentation of a thumb. I suggest you see the indentation from Rich Chrisman's gloved thumb. I think that's a fair inference from this evidence and from Rich Chrisman's testimony. He did what he said he did. He did put those gloves on, and he did check for a pulse. And that exhibit shows you. The digital is much clearer than the photograph itself. I guess if you need the digital, you can ask the court and the judge will make a decision on whether you're allowed to have that. But in any event, that's the digital photo that shows that. So if you look at the photo 94 and you don't see it, we're showing you the digital image, which is clear. In any event, back to Sergio being a calming force. Now you saw his testimony where he said he was inside, he was talking to Danny, and Danny said, "I'm going to get my bike." You just heard this a minute ago. I'm sorry, you just read it a minute ago from the transcript. But that's not what he told Detective Porter that night. Let's play clip 5.
I just remember him trying to wheel the bike out, Officer Chrisman trying to control him while Daniel was trying to wheel the bike out. I was now outside of the trailer thinking Daniel was going to wheel the bike out.
That's where he was. That's where he told Detective Porter. That's not where he told you he was when he was sitting there under oath. He told you something else. One more before I leave this picture, and this is my suggestion to you that this is consistent with the evidence. We looked at the exhibit 94, and a wooden chair that we know Danny fell down and fell upon. And if you look at the parts of that chair, I suggest it's reasonable to believe if Mr. Rodriguez got the bruise that time, it could have very easily came from there. The medical examiners both testified that the bruise was anywhere from the time, right at that time, to 3 or 4 days old, is my memory of the testimony, but certainly 2 to 3 days old. I'm just suggesting there's a logical explanation if it happened then, but there's really no evidence that it did happen then. Okay. The state's evidence, the state's case, is Sergio Virgilio and what he told you from the stand. What he told you as to when he was in his trailer was, Rich Chrisman opened the door and I walked right in behind him. That's what he said. And I'll show you that's what he said in just a second. And he told you I stayed in there until Rich pulled his pepper spray. And then I left for a couple seconds. And then I came right back in and I stayed the rest of the time. That was the state's case. That's what they told you happened. In other words, he was in there for all of the 5 minutes, but for a couple seconds. That's what he told you under arrest. We played you because I asked Sergio, didn't you tell Detective Klein or didn't you tell Detective Porter? And he said, no, I didn't say that. And sometimes he finally admitted it, but played you several clips of what he told the officers before. First, let's talk about what, to make sure that I have the evidence right concerning what he started with. So what happens then? And this is from page 39 of his direct. Chrisman walks right into the trailer, and what do? I drop my stuff, my pamphlet, and I walk right in with him. Now, I'd like to play, again, the clips that we played for you before, the ones on the exhibits 293, 94. First one is Detective Porter.
And then reholsters. Is that correct?
He pulls his service weapon, puts it to his head, and then returns it
And
into his...
reholsters it. Okay. When he goes to put hands on, as we would say.
Yes.
What happened then?
There was a struggle. I stepped into the trailer at that point and tried to grab Daniel's right arm, but Daniel kept pulling his arm away from me and at the same time pulling away from Officer Chrisman.
How could that be? He told you he was already in there. I followed Rich in. I was in there, is what he told you. But that's not what he told Detective Porter. He was outside. He stayed outside until Rich went hands-on with him. And then he told Detective Porter, I stepped in for the first time. That's totally inconsistent to what he told you under oath. He was out there right then. But that's not the only thing. This is what he told Sergeant Agee and Sergeant Klein.
Choke up. I step out of the trailer.
All right, so you step out the second time, you
Right.
go out
Yeah.
to catch your breath.
Okay. What did he just say? I stepped out the second time. I choked up. This is the OC, the pepper spray time. I stepped out the second time. According to him on direct, it was the first and only time. Okay, then a little later, when he says he's in there, at least he told you he was in there, here's what he told Detective Porter that night.
Now he's been tased by you and Officer Chrism, and he's in the process of getting the bike out. You are outside at the doorway at this time?
Yes.
Detective Porter, you are outside at the doorway? Sergio Virgilio, outside the doorway. I suggest that my colleague will tell you that he was standing right here with his toes and his nose, and that's where he was, because at some point he told you that. I suggest that's what should be told, but I don't think that's logical. I think he was outside, when he was supposed to be inside. That's what he told Detective Porter that night. Now that was the wheeling, so we've got the first, the OC, the dog, he's outside, the wheeling the bike out. Have we played 5 yet? Okay. I'm sorry. I checked one off too quickly. Thank you. The dog falls, and now we're to the wheeling of the bike out. Okay. And I think we heard this one before, but I'd like to hear it again.
The dog falls.
Yes.
You are still at the doorway.
Yes, outside the doorway. I just remember him trying to wheel the bike out, Officer Chrisman trying to control him while Daniel was trying to wheel the bike out. I was now outside of the trailer thinking Daniel was going to wheel the bike out.
I was outside the trailer thinking Daniel was going to wheel the bike out. And finally, when the shots, not the dog, but the shots with Daniel are, here's Detective Porter.
When you observe Danny being shot, where exactly are you, if you can remember?
I'm standing Basically, my feet are right on the edge of the doorway.
On the outside or on the outside?
Right. I'm maybe.
Are you in the trailer or are you on the porch?
I'm on the porch, but if my nose is basically hitting the plane at the inside of the trailer, that's
Okay.
That's about as far as possible. I'm on the porch, back about as far as possible. That's what he told the tech reporter. That is not what he told you. So that's just not one little inconsistency. I think that's like 6, or at least 5, significant inconsistencies from his sworn testimony that he wanted you to believe where he was. He was out here where he wasn't supposed to be. All right. There was testimony about a 906 radio call. I'd like to talk to you about that for a minute. The 906 is the officers' numbers if they feel they're in need of extra help ASAP. They can hit their mics, or I guess if they're in their car, they can call in their car, of course. They can say, 906, I need help. Or anyway, the 906 number is, officer, I need help right away. And Mr. Sergio Virgilio was asked about this on page 107. So if the 906 needs to be called, what happens? I mean, what is it that you do? Answer, you get on the radio. You give your call sign, location, and you say 906. Is that how long it takes? Yeah, yes. Question, in this situation, during that time period, if it had appeared to you that Daniel Rodriguez was a threat to anybody, deadly threat to anybody, would you have used that? Answer, yes. So he tells you that if Daniel Rodriguez would have been a threat, I'd have called 906. Well, if that makes sense, that he could call when he's out there if there's a threat, then why did he tell you this? Page 106. Now, one of the things you said was that you were a little afraid. Do you remember saying that in response to some of the questions here? Answer, yes. And you did admit that you were afraid, right? Answer, yes. What is it that you were afraid of? After seeing Chrisman put the gun to Danny's head, I didn't know what could happen. It could be me next. I don't know. Were you afraid that he would turn the gun on you? Objection leading sustained. Overruled. Answer, it was a possibility that crossed my mind. Well, that incident happened, according to Sergio Virgilio, after Rich Chrisman stepped in, before the pepper spray, the gun to the head. Sorry. Then there was the OC spray. So now you've just been told what he might do concerning 906 and a threat. So here's what he told Sergeant Agee and Officer Klein.
I step out of the trailer.
All right, so you step out the second time, you
Right.
go out
Yeah.
to catch your breath.
So now we've got him outside the trailer. He's told you that before he could use it to call 906 if there was any threat. He's also told you even before that he thought Chrisman was a threat. Now he's outside the trailer because of the OC spray. And he's now asked these questions concerning outside the trailer. Sorry, that's my turn. You went out for how long? Enough to catch my break seconds. And after you did that and you were out there, did you have an opportunity to call for a 906? Yes, I did have an opportunity. And was it appropriate at that time? Answer, no. But wait. Why wasn't it appropriate? According to him, last month in trial, he had just seen Rich Chrisman be a threat. Why didn't he call? He didn't call because there wasn't a threat. There wasn't a reason to. He was out here all by himself. He could have done it, but he told you there was no threat. We never heard anybody say that Officer Sergio Virgilio told them that Rich Chrisman was a threat, that he'd done these unspeakable things in front of him. You never heard Officer Rudy or Matson or Sergeant Agia or Officer Barrios ever say that. He told them that. I'm suggesting to you that he waited 2.5 years to tell somebody that he thought Rich Chrisman was a threat and to kind of just embellish his story. Because what did he do? What did he do when he left the trailer? Did he go to any of these officers and say anything? Did he get on his radio and say anything? Well, yes, he did get on his radio, and we'll talk about that shortly. The evidence is that Sergio Virgilio not only left his partner alone when this was over, he called 998 and he got out of there. He went over to his Tahoe, and what did he do? He used his MDT, or his radio, because we have a record of it. Did he call and say, there's a threat here? No. He ran Danny Rodriguez's name and date of birth. Why would he do that if this man was a threat? Why would the first thing he did after he left the trailer, why would he call and run Danny Rodriguez's name and date of birth? Wasn't any need to then. On the way down, Rich Chrisman ran it because he thought he'd like to find out what was going on with the suspect that he might have to be in contact with. We've got Sergio Virgilio's MDT unit history records. We know he didn't run it. Why not? He wasn't concerned about officer safety, that's what he told you. Why did he run him? We'll get back to that. All right, let's talk about the state's belief that the taser, Sergio Virgilio's taser was dropped inside, that Sergio Virgilio dropped it in here, not where everybody found it, outside. Before we do that, I want to talk a little bit, just for a minute, about the tasers. Sergio Virgilio told you about the second cartridge, and we know he had one on the bottom of his gun, the bottom of his taser, and we know he didn't use it. But I'd like to refresh your memories with his testimony concerning how easy it is to use it. You need to use it to back up your fellow officers. Page 11. When you use that second cartridge, how do you go about doing that? You take your hand, you take the top cartridge off from the front of the gun, and then you dispose of that. You take the other cartridge from underneath the handle, and you place that back in the top of the gun. Question, is that something that's really difficult to do? Answer, no. Wait a minute. We've got a technical difficulty. Okay, is that something that's really difficult to do? Answer, no. Question, is it something that you have to dispose of, the one cartridge, properly so that it would take an inordinate amount of time when you were involved with the suspect? Or is it something that can be done very quickly? Answer, it can be done very quickly. Well, then why didn't he do that? I mean, he had it. My colleague berates Mr. Chrisman for not having his and being able to use it, but his only star witness had his. He dropped it on the ground. He didn't use it. Why? You can change it out in a second. Very quickly, according to him. Why didn't he? Why didn't he back up Rich Chrisman with that second cartridge that he had? All right. Here's his testimony concerning dropping the taser inside. Page 53. Now, with regards to, you said that you're standing there when you tased or you fired your taser. What did you do with your taser? You stand it in here. I dropped it. Where did you drop it? Answer, somewhere in the front door area, the breech of the front door. So, he's standing here, he fires it. His story, Danny's over there. No, I'm sorry. Danny's in this area somewhere in here. It's about 10 feet away. And it works. And as we know, Rich then tries to handle him. And Sergio Virgilio tells you to drop a taser, right? And then, okay, can we go down, please? Right. And you said you were standing there when you dropped your taser. Answer, yes. So if Chrisman were standing where you indicated, which is right here, and he walked out the door this way, would the taser have been in the general vicinity of his feet as he was walking out? This is there. Rich Chrisman kicked his taser out the door. Theory, the case. One minute. And on page 78, okay, now you told us yesterday that you were standing inside of the trailer when you dropped your taser, right? Yes. You told us yesterday that you dropped. Answer, somewhere around there, yes. Question, somewhere in there. And then you think maybe Rich Chrisman kicked it outside where they found it. Answer, somebody moved it. Their backup theory on this is if Rich or someone didn't kick it out, that when Rich was gloved up and went and checked Danny, he reached down with those bloody gloves and he threw it out. That's their backup theory. I'm sure you'll hear more of that. In passing, I'd suggest to you that if you looked at the taser, no one saw any blood prints on it. The only person who saw any blood said it was spatter. You can't take a glove that has blood on it and throw something and have splatter. All right. But let's take a look at Sergio Virgilio's cartridge. This is Exhibit 222. As you know, the police seized all the tasers in the cartridge. This is the cartridge that he used, and this is all the wire around it. This cartridge you will have in the exhibit room, and you can take it and you can unwrap all that wire, and you can find out how long it is. And you can see down there where the wire is before the gun's fired, it's empty. And you can see, this is the second cartridge of Mr. Sergio Virgilio's, and you can see the one that's not used, and it's full of wire, as it should be, or not if he'd used it. So, thank you. Why is that important? Well, it's important because you remember that the wire that was measured out of one of the tasers somewhere at one time is 20 to 23 feet long. And you know that the evidence is and wires, and it hits the person When it hits the person, the wire stops coming out. It doesn't go out any farther. So if Sergio Virgilio was standing right here, how could he have 20 feet of wire out? The room isn't 20 feet wide. It's not even 15 feet. And in any event, Mr. Rodriguez was in this area. He was 8 or 10 feet away. If Sergio Virgilio is telling you the truth, that he stood here and did it and dropped it. But if he's standing out here and, excuse me, I don't believe I said in opening that he was standing in the bushes. And I'm not going to tell you now he was standing in the bushes. I'm not going to suggest that's the evidence. Okay? He's out on the porch, somewhere in the cement area, depending on how afraid he is. And if he's standing here when he shoots him, out here, with the sight to him, and I'm not suggesting to you that tasers can shoot around corners or shoot through walls. I'm suggesting that when he shot him, he had a clean sight. He was standing out on the porch where he was safe. That's where he shot him. And that's why all that wire's out of there. That's what makes sense from the physical evidence. Oh, and there's more. What did he tell Detective Porter that night?
Now he's been tased by you and Officer Chrisman, and he's in the process of getting the bike out. You are outside at the doorway of
I tased him, and I'm outside. I misstated what you just heard. He didn't say, I tased him and I'm outside. He said, he's been tased, and he's outside. But we don't have to rely upon the recording of Detective Porter concerning this. We can listen to what he told Sergeant Agia and Sergeant Klein, what he did.
You deployed this while you were inside the threshold of the door. And now it's laying the signal tape that's outside of the door.
Right.
So when you actually left, you walked out, you brought the taser with you and dropped it out here?
Yes.
You left, you went outside, and you dropped the taser. That's what you just heard. And Sergio Virgilio told Detective Porter that night, yes. Why did he come in here and tell you something else? Why did he try to convince you of something else? Sign. We have exhibits 25, 27, and 28 that are in evidence, and I'd like to show you those briefly, and they support. There's the taser outside where he dropped it. And you can begin to see the wires there. But the next one's even closer. And there's the wires. Are they straight? Like they've been, taut? No. They look like taser wires that are coiled still. And then the last one shows them as well. All right. Judge, could we have a few minutes?
Sure. A stretch break, you want to excuse the jurors?
I'd like 5 minutes. Is that okay?
All right, we'll take a 5-minute break, ladies. If you go back to the jury room, we'll be right with you, ladies and gentlemen. Women and children first.